Once. Not twice, not 3 times, just once upon a time. There was a girl, and the girl was running away from her family. For her family had treated her cruelly. She was hungry, she was cold, and she fled into the forest. Deeper and deeper between the trees she ran. She had never been there before, but anything was better than the cruelty of her family. And there in the deep dark heart of the forest, she came to a clearing as the light faded, and there stood a tall castle, derelict, a castle made of stone. And the light of the moon came from behind the dark clouds, and she saw there, in a window high in the tower, a shining, bony, white skull. "Oh, let me in, I am hungry and cold." And a voice came from that skull, and the voice went like this: come in, have no fear of what may pass." And she went to the heavy oak door of that castle, and she leant against it, and the door creaked open. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, what sound did that door make as it creaked open? Let me hear. And now she was inside the castle, and she stepped, step by step, up the spiral staircase. And when she got to the top of the staircase, another door creaked open. And she stood in a stone chamber, and on the far side of the chamber there was the skull on the window ledge. And she stepped towards the skull, and she noticed behind her there was an empty stone fireplace. "I am cold and I am hungry. Please give me something to eat." "Make a pancake for us to share," said the skull. "Have no fear of what may pass." And she looked, and there was a table, and suddenly on the table there was a bowl, and next to the bowl were eggs and flour and a jug of water, and she started to mix these together into a batter. And as she worked at that batter, she heard clattering, a clattering from the chimney, and down into the fireplace clattered a white bone, and then another white bone, and another clattered down the chimney until the fireplace was full of shining white bones. And when the fireplace was full of bones, and as she worked at the batter, the girl noticed that those bones were starting to fix together. And from the fireplace there stepped a huge white bony skeleton. But the skeleton had no skull on its shoulders. And the skeleton started reaching for the wall, for the skeleton could not see. And with its bony fingers it reached along the wall of that stone chamber towards the skull in the window. And the girl worked at the batter, and she said, "Oh, skull, the skeleton is big and powerful, but you are small and delicate. Does that skeleton belong to you?" The skull only spoke, "Cook the pancake so we can share. Have no fear of what may pass." And the girl looked, and now there was heat, flames in the fireplace, and the flames were hot And there was a pan, and she set the pan on the flames, and she poured the batter into the pan, and the pancake began to cook and sizzle. But she noticed out the corner of her eye that huge skeleton was getting closer and closer, feeling its way along the wall towards that skull in the window. And when she had finished cooking, and the room was full of the delicious smell of good pancake. Do you like that smell?
Yeah.
When the room was full and it was ready, she took that pan and she put the pancake onto the plate in the middle of the table. And she went to where the skull was, and just as the skeleton was reaching the skull, just as the skeleton was about to lift the skull, she snatched it away. And the girl carried that small and delicate skull to the table and set it down. Let us share the pancake. Have no fear of what may pass. And she took a knife and she cut the pancake in two. But the other half of the pancake, the half of the pancake for the skull, turned black and burned and crispy. And the skull began to eat with its clacking jaws, clack, 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 as the black half of the pancake disappeared. And the girl ate her half of the pancake, and it was tasty and warm and nourishing. When she had finished, no longer am I hungry, O skull, but I am tired now, so tired. Give me a place to rest. But she noticed how now that skeleton was crawling, hands on knees and feet, scraping its way across the floor towards the table with a scraping sound. Well, she lifted the skull in her hands, and the skull said, "Let us rest. Sleep, sleep, but protect me, protect me. Have no fear of what may pass." And the girl, she took the skull and she climbed into the bed that had appeared there in front of the fire. And she covered with bedclothes up to her chin, and she held the skull in her lap, and she was soon asleep. But she woke a few hours later to hear a crash and a clatter, and the table had been overturned, and the tables rattled on the floor, and the knife as well, where the skeleton had upset them. And she saw the skeleton coming creeping closer and closer, its bones scraping on the stone floor towards the bed. But the girl was tired and she fell asleep again. And when she woke, it was to feel that the covers being dragged away from her body. She held on tight to the skull, and the skull said, "Protect me, protect me. Have no fear of what may pass." And she held on to the skull. And now, with the covers ripped away, the skeleton gripped onto her ankles with its icy bony finger bones and started to pull her from the bed. And she saw now the light of dawn coming. The skeleton pulled her from the bed and across the floor, but she held on tight to the skull in her lap. She held on so tight, and she could feel the bony fingers creeping up her body, closer and closer to the skull, but she held on tight. And the bones of the fingers started to prise her fingers away from the skull. And just as she could grip no more, just as she was about to let the skull go, the first rays of the morning light fell upon the skeleton. And it rose huge and tall and shook and trembled and then clattered down bone by bone, and the bones turned to dust. And the skeleton was no more. And a great gust of wind came through the window and blew those ashes up the chimney and away Away! Away! And the girl, she slept once more. And when she woke upon the floor, it was bright, and the sunlight was streaming in, and she saw the walls were coated in bright tapestries which depicted hunting scenes. And the bed was new and made of oak wood. But she felt the skull. Oh, the skull was gone. Had the skeleton come back and taken the skull? And as she looked there beside the bed, the girl saw a ghost. The ghost of that young girl. She had long hair and a faded dress. Who are you? Thank you. You saved me. I was that skull. I don't understand, said the girl. Please explain. Who was the skeleton? Many lifetimes ago, I lived in this castle with my father. The terrible lord came to take me in marriage. I resisted him, but he kidnapped me. He took me away. He said he would marry me, but I refused. I tried to run. He took his knife and he stabbed me in my heart. My father pursued him, and in revenge, my father cut off his head. Since that time, his skeleton has haunted our castle. But without a head he cannot see, and every night he follows me and takes my small skull and sets it on his shoulders so he can see. This has been my duty over so many lifetimes, but now, with your courage, you have saved me, and I can walk free into the garden of death. And with that, the spirit disappeared through the window and was gone. And as she disappeared, she turned and smiled and raised one hand in farewell. And the girl rose from her bed, and she went out and heard in the corridors of that castle music playing and children laughing. And there she remained as lady of that castle, as if that girl had lived again. It was good, the life there. She was fed well. Never did she return to the cruelty of her own family. In that castle in the forest, she lived happily ever after.